I still remember the night when my brother told me about these children. All the same height, wearing the same dresses and suits, and the hair neatly cropped, down to the shoulders for the girls, to the ears for the boys. But the face is the weirdest thing about them. Completely bare, with no features to adorn it. No mouth, no eyes, nothing. Like a mannequin, but skin instead of wood. And even though there is nothing that can make the sound, the shrill laughter of the children echoes throughout their group. I asked him why they came and what they did, but he just replied with, "For people who don't know their past." I didn't know what that meant, and that's what freaked me out even more. The fact that I could go to sleep one day and wake up with them surrounding me, it kept me up for nights, wondering what it could mean. And it bothered me for years. Until 3 years ago. I had a girlfriend, my second. My first one was very open about who she was, and she was completely willing to share. The second one, not so much. She was always a little withdrawn, even though we were in a relationship. She never really liked to tell me much. I wanted her to talk, but she never really thought it was the time. And then I tried asking her directly. "Why don't you want to tell me much?" I asked her. She turned to me while we were sitting in bed. "Because it bothers me. What happened to me? And I don't like to talk about it. Can we please drop this? Why do you have to know so much about me?" Even though it bothered me, I decided not to prod too hard. I didn't want to come off as too pushy. And then I heard them. The laughter, like children playing in the yard. Distant at first, but getting louder by the second. I asked my girlfriend if she could hear it, but she stayed silent, asleep. I thought I was going crazy. But then they opened the door. Just as my brother described them, with dresses and suits, and those completely blank faces. He said mannequin, but this was much more unnerving than that. It looked like you could pinch their cheeks, but your fingers would slide off the skin. I thought it was over for me. Whatever my brother meant by forgetting the past, I had committed that crime, and they were going to do whatever they would with me. But they grabbed my girlfriend. Pulling her down to the floor, they circled her. She and I tried kicking them away, but it felt as if their body was made of metal. They circled her, grabbed her limbs, and started to pull. Even though it hurt to hit them, I tried to beat them away with my hands and legs, but to no avail. She squirmed, but I saw her armpits and thighs tear. And eventually, with a loud pop, her arms were ripped off completely in a bloody mess. And just as soon as they arrived, they left. The laughter fading away as fast as the volume was originally cranked up. I called the police, and over the years, I consulted a psychologist. It took me a long time, with a lot of work, but 3 months ago, I finally managed to ask someone else out. I thought I'd be fine, provided I didn't go too far with the questions. But I made the same mistake. I made the same fucking mistake. I asked her, in bed, when I would meet her parents. She turned away from me and said, "You won't get to." Before I could stop myself, I asked why. Why did I have to ask why? What possessed me to ask why? She said the words from her lips that scared me. "I don't want to talk about it." That was 10 minutes ago, and I can hear the laughter ringing in my ears. In the original Pokemon Red and Blue, when you encounter your rival in Lavender Town, he asks you whether or not you know what it's like to have one of your Pokemon die. At this point in the game, he no longer has his Raticate that he used in previous battles. Your rival battle before this took place aboard the SS Anne. Your rival's Raticate sustained serious injuries from the battle, but because of crowding and confusion on the luxury liner, he was unable to make it to a Pokemon Center in time, and the Raticate passed away. The real reason your rival is in Lavender Town to begin with is to lay his deceased friend to rest. Despite all of this, your rival never outwardly tells you that you're responsible for the death of his Pokemon. He hides his grief, and instead channels that energy into the motivation he needed to continue his quest to become the Indigo League champion. The death of his Raticate effectively destroys your rival's impish childhood innocence. Although he tells himself that he doesn't hold you responsible, he subconsciously holds a great deal of resentment towards you, which further fuels his ambitions. Tearfully swearing upon his Raticate's grave to not fail in what he set out to do, he trains hard in hopes of becoming better than you, defeating you, and to eventually make it to the Pokemon League. Mere moments after he became Indigo League champion, he was defeated by you. Although he fulfilled his promise to his fallen Pokemon, it was only for a painfully brief instant. In the end, your rival is scolded by his grandfather, while you receive the professor's praise. During the course of the game, you steal your rival's innocence, crush his dreams, and ultimately snatch away the love of his own grandfather. Oh, and by the way, your rival doesn't have any parents. He's an orphan. I'm getting pretty sick of this. It seems every time I get a new employee, they disappear. The last person I had working for me, I thought they'd stay, because they were different from the others. I didn't hire them this time, they transferred to me from a promotion. So I thought for sure they'd stay, but just like all the others, they disappeared too. I don't get it. Is it something I keep doing? I always thought I was pretty nice to my employees. The only time I don't physically talk to them myself is when it's time for me to hand over the keys to lock up the place. It's not that I don't like them, it's just the key guy, Willie. He kinda gives me the creeps. And for me to get the keys to give to the employees, I have to talk to Willie, so... Well, instead I just avoid him and I send him a text and he goes and talks to my employees himself. That keeps him away from me and still gets the job done. I don't know why, but he's always creeped me out. I mean, he seems like a nice enough guy, but there's just something about him always walking around with that white beard and brown coat. And that sound of keys just jingling, it makes me so uneasy. Anyway, I digress. I hired someone new, and this time I'm going to be as nice as I can. I'm going to do everything myself this time. I'll even go get the keys and hand them over myself when it's time for them to learn how to lock up the shop. I'm going to make sure this new girl doesn't disappear on me, like all the others. I guess this means I have to get the key from Willie myself, though. I wish I could just get the keys from my other employees, but since they just disappear, I have to get poor Willie to make a new set every time. I kind of feel bad about that. Anyway, I send a text to Willie and let him know I'm coming by to pick up the keys. I get in my car and I drive to his house. This place is freaky. No wonder Willie gives me the creeps, living in a place like this. It's a big house, but it looks so run down, like no one even lives here. And the wood's broken in places and it's just covered in cobwebs anyway. I walk up to the door and ring the doorbell. Well, I guess not everything here is broken. That doorbell was loud, with your old-fashioned ding-dong. I waited a bit with no answer. Okay, so I figured I'd just open the door and announce myself. Willie, it's Abraham. I'm coming in, okay? I enter his house, calling Willie's name, but still no answer. This place is just as spooky on the inside as it is on the outside. You can see the pipes in the ceiling leaking, like they're going up to the next floor. There's mold in the walls, and it just feels unpleasant here. I hear a sound coming from some kind of basement. Willie must be down there, I say to myself. I head down some stairs that leads into a basement door. It seems to be locked, but there's a light coming from the bottom of the door. I knock on the door and shout, Willie, you in there? I then notice a key hanging next to the door. I grab it, but I drop it right away. It felt weird, like some kind of leathery thing. I picked it back up and looked at it. It looks so weird, like the teeth of the key is made out of some kind of bone. But the end of it looks wrapped in skin. Gross, I say. You know, Willie has always given me the creeps, but this is getting ridiculous. I place the key in the door, and I open it. And holy shit, a really foul smell hits me and causes me to vomit. It was so bad. And as I look up, there are my missing employees. All of them. All hacked up into pieces, with keys sitting next to them. A lot of keys, all made of bone, and sitting next to the keys is boiling hot liquid metal. I couldn't believe my eyes. And that's when I heard it. Jingle, jingle, jingle. I turn around, and there stands Willie, holding an axe. He smiles at me, and he says, "So good of you to come." And that's the last thing I remember. Before blackness. Nothing but blackness. This story occurred in the summer of 2003. On a road trip I was taking with my friend and roommate at the time. Since I don't want to divulge his actual name, I'll just call him Dave for storytelling purposes. It was the second day of the road trip, and being two broke men in our early 20s, we had opted to not pay for motels and instead camp near my dodgy second-hand 1994 Jeep Wrangler and live off grocery store food. We had reached central Queensland at this point of the road trip, and it had been a sweltering day with a 98% humidity rate. It was beginning to become late in the day, and there was clearly only a couple of minutes of sunlight left, so Dave and I decided we'd pull off at the next exit from the tourist drive and try to find a secluded place to eat, have a beer and a rest. I pulled off at the next exit without even bothering to try and see what the faintly lit exit sign said. I was tired from a day of driving and decided it wasn't really worth the effort it would take to lift my weary eyes. As I pulled off, I was greeted by a four-way roundabout. The way I had just came from, a right turn towards something or other beach, a left turn towards a town, and the road back onto the highway. We had already decided we wouldn't be needing any food or such for the night, and I figured the beach would probably be the most secluded location, least likely for us to get mugged, you know? The road to the beach briskly transitioned from asphalt to dirt, and within a few minutes, we'd arrived at a small dirt parking lot, surrounded by bushland, featuring a short sandy path down to the deserted beach. After a few playthroughs of a The Vines album or two, a couple camp stove cooked sausages and a few too many beers, we settled down for the night on the sand. I awoke at around 3 a.m. to an almost invisible beach and the roar of the waves. I wasn't sure initially what had jolted me from my sleep, but decided it wasn't worth waking Dave over a forgotten nightmare or possum rustling in trees nearby. As I was beginning to start to settle down again, I heard something rustle in the bushland behind me. I brushed it off though, as a harmless critter, and decided I should get some shut-eye before the long day of driving tomorrow. I lay down, and as I was on the verge of sleep, I heard the rustle again, followed by an inhuman, almost demonic murmuring. I woke up Dave quietly. "Dave, listen to that sound coming from the bush." Dave murmured something about how much of an arsehole I was, and began to roll over and go back to sleep. I grabbed him and pushed him upright. "I'm not fucking kidding, Dave. There's something in the bush." He got up with an annoyed scowl and bothered to listen. I saw his face instantly change from that annoyed scowl to a look of utter horror. "What do you think it is?" he whispered. I replied with an annoyed, "Why the fuck do you think I woke you?" He nodded his head, understanding my unappreciation of the useless question, as he also was in understanding that the noise clearly didn't originate from anything remotely human. The rustling began again, and stopped by the edge of the bushland. I could feel its eyes glaring into the back of my neck, as the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight upright, and the nervous feeling in my stomach rose to a crescendo. Dave and I simultaneously turned our heads to meet the eyes of the sinister creature that was staring at us. Its eyes red and full of hatred. Its limbs, although arranged similarly to a human's, were long and disproportionate. The creature leapt at us with incredible speed, landing on me and promptly beginning its attempts to claw me apart. It landed 2 blows on my arms, which I'd brought up to shield my face before Dave smashed a stubby over its head. It quickly turned its attention to him and leapt at him. By the time I got up from the sand, Dave was dead. Nothing but a hunk of unrecognisable meat on the sand. I made a run for my Wrangler, hoping and praying that Dave's dead carcass would satisfy the creature's attention long enough for me to escape. As I jumped into the car, not even bothering to open the door and instead just vaulting through the open window, I heard an inhuman screech as the creature finished devouring Dave and began hurling itself towards my car. I turned the ignition and hoped to God the piece of shit Wrangler would start quickly. By God, am I lucky it did. The moment the engine roared to life, I dropped the handbrake and floored the gas, hoping, praying that I could outrun the beast. As the car hit 20k an hour, the creature reached the point that the car had just sat. Upon 50k an hour, the creature had come within a few meters of my vehicle. And as I reached 80k an hour, I began to pull away, to the tuneless sound of the creature's furious screeches. I pulled back onto the highway that night and I didn't stop until I made it back to my flat. 17 hours away from that damn beach, that forsaken path and that fucking exit. I never went to the police about Dave's death or the happenings of that night in the early summer of 2003. His girlfriend reported him missing, and I was originally a suspect regarding the circumstances of his disappearance, but nothing ever came of it. So I write this as a warning to anyone planning on going on a road trip through central Queensland, to choose their accommodations wisely, as you never know what insidious creature lies in wait for you at that coastal bushland.
So last time, I told you about me running with a Wendigo. Well, this time I got another experience. One that caused all sorts of problems for Jimmy, myself and the other patrons. You know, it's not uncommon to have customers that travel halfway across the world to come to our tavern. But usually they call ahead of time to warn us of their arrival. Since we don't have all the information concerning all monsters, cryptids and ghosts. After my day off, I went back to work with a fresh mind and a bit more cautious than last time. Because of the incident, Jimmy had hired another bartender, who I had to train. His name was Finn, and was a lanky boy with flaming red hair and freckles that dotted his face. And he too also had an encounter with an otherworldly being. He never told me which monster he'd run into, so I didn't press him for the details. The only thing that gave me a vague idea of what kind of beast he'd run into was 4 long scars on each of his forearms and neck. It could have possibly been a werewolf, a grim, or anything with sharp claws. But something told me it was a werewolf, just by Finn's reaction when a werewolf had entered the building. Tom gave me a quick nod of acknowledgement before he went to his usual booth in the far right corner of the tavern. A few more werewolves joined him, all of which entered the tavern in their wolf form. I placed out a lavender candle and lit it, something Jimmy had learned over the years. Lavender doesn't just calm humans, it can also calm monsters. There was a group of vampires on the other side of the tavern. The chupacabra sat on a stool at the bar, sipping on a pure blood mocktail. The Jersey Devil chilled in the farthest top left corner booth. And many more all conversed and sipped their drinks. I smiled proudly, like a father would smile at his son after a home run. Finn nervously served a hag a plate of raw liver and kidneys. Her rattly breath can be heard underneath her balaclava. She thanked him and went to find a seat. I taught Finn how to make a scotch with eyeballs, a Bloody Mary, a Bloody Martini, and other drinks. It took him a while to figure out the right amount of blood to alcohol ratio. Most of the patrons were in good spirits, so they didn't mind the difference in ratios, while a few of them returned and requested me to make their next drink. I patted Finn on the back and told him that it was alright to make mistakes. The boy nodded his head, continued to serve drinks, while I delivered food to the other patrons. I had to take the plate of kidneys and liver back to the kitchen for Stacy to cut 'em up for the hag. And that's when Jimmy poked his head out of the office and called me in. You got this?" I turned to ask Finn, but he was already busy with another customer. I smiled and left the bar, headed into Jimmy's office. Took a seat on one of the leather chairs and waited for Jimmy to finish up on the phone.
We've got a special patron coming in tonight, although they didn't specify their species,"
Jimmy stated as soon as he put the phone back onto its receiver. "We're not letting them in, are we?" I asked incredulously. Jimmy pursed his lips and sighed.
"Money is money."
"But we don't even know their species. What if they have a terrible relationship with one of the other patrons? What if they prey on another monster? What if..."
"That's enough. I knew the risks when I agreed to let them come here."
Jimmy stared me down. I closed my mouth and didn't utter another word afterwards. Once I left his office, I felt an uneasy feeling settle in the pit of my stomach that made it churn. I felt sick with anxiety. I've become close to most of the patrons here. I don't want anything bad to happen to them. A million what-ifs bounced around inside my head as I continued to serve the customers. It was near 4 in the morning when the tavern door opened to reveal a snake humanoid being with snakes for hair and big bulging yellow eyes. And their tongue flicked from their mouth, filled with needle-sharp teeth. One of the patrons looked directly into its eyes and immediately turned to stone. The whole tavern turned into chaos as all of the patrons tried to shield their eyes. I looked over to see our new bartender had turned into a grey stone statue. I closed my eyes and I could hear her slither up to the bar.
"My name is Thena, daughter of Echidna and Typhon."
And I didn't need to hear any more to figure out what she was. We had a gorgon on our hands. "What would you like?" I asked. All the while I still had my eyes closed. Steno hummed and I could hear her drum her long nails on top of the bar as she looked at the drink menu.
"A Malibu Sunsets,"
she hissed out. I turned around and I was able to finally open my eyes. Started to get her drink ready just as Jimmy walked out of his office. He looked at me and then to the statue of Finn. His eyes showed remorse and guilt, but he knew immediately who we were dealing with. He went back into his office, probably to call the cleaning services that deal with monsters. Once I was done making her drink, I cautiously placed the drink in front of her. I could hear her sip her drink and let out a sigh.
"It's great to have a place to unwind."
And she laughed and asked for another Malibu Sunset. I prepared her drink right away and wondered when she would leave. Another 19 Malibu Sunsets later, and Steno slithered out of the tavern, leaving a dozen of our patrons petrified. Gorgons cause all sorts of problems for everyone.
This was a few years ago. I had a little job at a convenience store. It was like a beacon for the couple of people that would come in early on my night shift. Their tired eyes, ready to go home and crash. Since I didn't have a car yet, I had to walk. The fastest way there was a short, well, about a 10-minute walk through the woods behind my house, which was already creepy for me when it was 11:20 at night. Oftentimes I'd hear noises around me and, like any normal person, shake it off as some small animal.
But a few times, I heard larger footsteps, or I'd see something at the corner of my eye. I'd just walk a little faster to get through the woods. On one of my last days of working at the little convenience store, I was putting on my vest and doing my hair to make it less of a nappy mess. At this point in my life, it was hard for me. I felt alone. No one was there. So that makes what I'm about to say hard for even me to believe. I was getting my last things together when I heard tapping at the window next to me. I quickly shut the blinds that I'd forgotten to close. Thinking I was just crazy, I started my trek through the woods, looking around me before I went into the abyss. On the way there, I could feel something staring at me, so I walked faster. I walked maybe a couple of feet. Then I heard a large animal crunching through the dead leaves and branches on the ground. And then it stopped as soon as I did. I backed up against a tree, looking around me with the flashlight on my phone. Nothing. I stood there frozen as I felt the tree I was behind moving. I looked up in the darkness to see a tan creature. I froze, my heart jumping in my chest. Its beady, lifeless eyes looking at me. But most unsettling was its smile, almost as if it wanted me to trust it. But my instincts told me otherwise. So I ran through the trail, faster than ever. I could hear it right behind me, almost reaching me. It started talking in broken English.
Come.
Its raspy voice. It kept repeating it, as if it was trying to say it like a normal human.
Come.
Leaves crunched as it ran after me.
Come.
Its raspy, unhuman-like voice was getting louder, as if demanding I stop running from it. I knew that if I stopped, I'd likely not live long enough to get to my pathetic night shift job.
Come.
This time, the voice was much more human. I finally got to the field, and downhill, I could see the convenience store's bright lights illuminating the surrounding field. I ran straight down. I could still hear it, crunching through the dewy but dry grass. Finally, I reached the door to the store, yelling gibberish about the creature right behind me. When I got inside, the daytime employee asked me what was wrong. I told them what happened, and she didn't believe me. She laughed in my face and told me she was going home. She left to go in the back room and gather her things, and that's when I heard a tapping at the door. Nothing was there, though. She came back and then left the store. A day later, I found out she was missing. The police came in and asked me questions. I didn't tell them about the creature, even though I knew in my heart what happened to her. Nowadays I have a car, and I carry a pocket knife always. I occasionally hear tapping. But all I can do is make sure my house is secure, with cameras and my 3 dogs. I'm currently working on my associate's degree at a nearby college. I'm unsure if these entities have another name, but I've always just referred to them as static men. When I was a young child, I remember waking up late in the middle of the night. I was fast asleep, blanketless, on a round woven rug that laid midway along the wood panel wall of my aunt's living room. Half asleep and growing chilly, I reached around for a blanket that wasn't there. I believe it was then that I heard the muffled voices, and I noticed the pale, eerie glow of static flickering from the old TV. The light from the old television painted the room in weak and sickly hues of greens and blues. Still half washed with sleep, I was able to see my uncle asleep in his recliner from across the room. I heard the muffled voices again and assumed it was my parents arguing. Not really wanting to get into trouble for being awake, I kept my eyes slightly closed while pretending to be fast asleep. The muffled voices seemed closer, and yet still unintelligible. I started to become afraid and wanted to run to my uncle for comfort, or at the very least, have him change the channel, because the voices I heard sounded even closer and were coming from not my parents, but from the old TV. Peeking out as a child pretending to be asleep, I faced the television and I saw them. The strange silhouettes of staticky figures on the screen, noticeably appearing more defined than the chaotic jittering of the background. They moved unnaturally, fading softly from one moment to the next. They stood there, watching us, from just beyond the glass. No longer speaking, just eerily watching, quietly. It was a while before I noticed the air had become almost electrically charged, with a smell that I now know is ozone. As the television flickered off for the last time, there was no transition from when the television went out to when he appeared in front of it. He was accompanied by a low idling hum, similar to fluorescent light that was more felt than heard. I closed my eyes tightly, hoping to fool this strange figure out of desperation as I softly wept out of fear. The hair on my skin raised with a prickling sensation as I felt him walk past me. Forcing myself to peek again, I watched this strange silhouette-like entity through my watery eyes. For several moments, as he stood in front of my uncle, distorting and scrambling himself, slowly fine-tuning every detail and unnaturally becoming his identical, except mirroring every noticeable feature in muted, unnatural tones. I watched, horrified, as my uncle faded into the nothingness before me. And slowly, this strange thing took his place. Unable to control myself, I frantically sat up and erupted loudly in tears, hoping that this was just a bad dream. This thing, now my uncle, turned from where he stood, looking down, expressionless at me, while I uncontrollably sobbed, and simply walked out of the room. I sat there, fearfully crying in the dim room, not knowing what to do, while listening to the same unintelligible voices being heard again from elsewhere in the house.
I've had hypnagogic hallucinations for as long as I can remember. Those flashes of unreality that pop up just on the cusp of sleep. Mine were usually tactile, or occasionally auditory. I couldn't count the number of times that I'd jolt back to full wakefulness to the feeling of innumerable insects, or a breath on my neck, or hands grasping at my exposed skin. For one memorable month, I was disturbed every night by the approaching footsteps of a recently deceased pet. They don't really bother me anymore. I've been used to them for years. That's why I wasn't concerned at first when I started seeing the grey hag. I'd only moved into my new apartment a few weeks before her first appearance. It was the first properly cool night of the season, and I was pleasantly nestled down under my doona. I only caught the barest glimpse of her, just the barest impression of age and hair and approach, but it was enough to send me bolt upright and scrambling for my lamp, heart pounding harder than it had in years. I'm fully aphantastic, usually, even in my dreams. Her, though, I could see. It took me longer than I'd usually care to admit to soothe myself enough that I could turn the lights back off. And when I managed it, I still needed to have my bedding cocooned up as far as I could handle, eyes screwed tightly closed against the darkness of my room. She didn't appear again that night, thankfully, though that may have had more to do with my tense sleeplessness than anything else. She did show up the next night, though, and the next, and the next, and the next. I'd started to calm down about the whole thing by about the fourth night. Years of skepticism pushing away any lingering concerns. I actually started to lean into the experience a little. Even though my stomach tightened with dread every time she popped up, it was still an exciting experience to be able to visualize something so vivid, so real. She seemed to get a little bit clearer each night, as I caught more of the details. A pruned but surprisingly normal visage framed by grey-white hair, so long that it bled out into the darkness around her. I could never quite imagine her eyes, but her hand was always prominent, always reaching towards me with its scraggy nails and its paper-thin skin. On the sixth night, I heard her call my name in my mother's voice. That was the end of my fascination with her, as strange as it seems. But with that simple addition, she seemed so much more present, so much closer, and I was done. It was a tense night, that sixth. I spent it desperately still, too afraid to empty my bladder, too afraid to roll over, too afraid to even breathe naturally, lest some tiny movement or hitch draw even more of her attention. I spent the seventh night at my parents' house, and armed with a good night's sleep and a reassuring chat over coffee, I had the courage to weather the eighth in my own bed. Things were stable for a while. She still flashed up every night, reaching out for me, and she called my name maybe one night in 3, but with a little time and a careful refusal to acknowledge in the vision. I started to learn how to let myself continue on to sleep past this newest hallucination. It was only ever an issue just as I was drifting off after all. She didn't even appear in nightmares, so it wasn't that difficult to catch an uninterrupted night's sleep.
she finally touched me on the 39th night. It was only the briefest moment, as usual, but it was still enough to clearly discern the touch. 3 distinct points of contact brushed against my face, her fingers trailing a mere centimetre across my cheek before she was snatched away by the night. I had my hand on my lamp switch before I could even consider that movement might be a bad idea, flooding the room with its sharp white light. There was nothing there, of course, but I could still feel the icy cold of her fingers on my face, intensifying by the minute as I pressed myself against the headboard, eyes flickering around the room. I knew that I'd have to do something when they started to hurt, and so I flung myself out of bed before I could let myself reconsider, hitting every light switch that I could reach between my bed and the bathroom. Obscuring my view of the bathroom with steam seemed dangerous, so I ran the hot water tap into the basin instead of turning on the shower. I checked the area over in the mirror as I waited for the water to heat. 3 slightly reddened patches met my inspection, as though I'd rested ice cubes on my skin for a moment too long. The warm water from the basin seemed to ease the sting a little, and continued application of a washcloth soaked in it provided better and better results. I spent the night there, sitting on the counter so that I could set my back into the corner, periodically refreshing the temperature of the water. By morning, the pain had stopped entirely, and the patches had settled into the barely there blue of an underdeveloped bruise. My parents let me stay for 3 nights this time, before they gently pushed me back to my own apartment. I don't blame them. This would hardly be the first time that I'd burst in babbling about something touching me. The 43rd night was spent once more in my own bed, albeit with my bedroom light blazing. And nothing happened. I eventually managed to drift off towards sleep, despite my pounding heart and bright room. But all that floated past my consciousness was the faintest scent of mildew. I made a mental note to wipe the bathroom down the next day and let myself fall fully asleep, waking up in the morning feeling as rested as I ever did. The smell was even stronger the next night, despite my efforts, and strangely tinged with bleach, which I hadn't used. Still, a bad odour was hardly an alarming experience, and I didn't let it bother me too much, simply leaving the windows open while I was at work the next day so that it would air out. It didn't help. By the 6th night, the smell of mildew and bleach had reached almost unbearable levels. The handyman that I'd hired hadn't been able to find any signs of mould or chemical damage, and since the smell only came while I was on the cusp of sleep, clearly believed I was entirely hysterical. There was little choice in the end but to accept that the smell was illusory and unaddressable. I decided that I could live with that. There was no risk to my health if it wasn't real, and I'd rather have the smell than the hag. I set up a bucket next to the bed in case the smell overcame me, and settled into my newest sleep dysfunction. She didn't even wait for me to start falling asleep on the 7th night. I'd just turned off the lights and snuggled down into my blankets when the sound of a raspy breath reached me. I held my breath as I lay there, knowing that I was fully awake, but the breathing continued. Gradually, my eyes adjusted to the dark, and then I could start to make her out. An all too familiar silhouette slouched over in the corner. She was gone when I turned on the light, and then back again as soon as I turned it off. The solution seemed fairly obvious, if problematic for my power bill. I continued on like that for another 3 weeks, constantly in the light. Occasionally I'd see her for a moment in the dark closet, or in a new room before I hit the light switch. But if she was inclined to do anything in those brief snatches, she never got the chance. I learned to sleep in the light, and I actually haven't had a hypnagogic episode in that time. But I have a different issue now. My bedroom light burned out about 4 o'clock this morning. The popping noise of it pulled me awake, and it took me a moment to shake off the disorientation of sleep enough to realise what was going on. There she was, standing in her usual corner. She didn't make any sort of movement towards me, not while I came fully awake, not while I reached slowly for the lamp, She just stood there, the heavy sound of her breathing overpowering even my own. I've been writing this for the last couple of hours while I waited for the sun to rise. She just stood there the entire time, unmoving, bathed in the light of first my lamp and now the sun. She hasn't moved yet, but I can see her eyes now. I've been on this case for about a month now, and I think I'm getting pretty close. I'm an investigator. A little while ago, a woman by the name of Karen came into the office. She was absolutely distraught, saying that her sister had been missing for months now. She's tried ringing her, and even gone to her house, but no answer. And she would like Kevin Porcupine, to locate her. Weird name, I know, Porcupine. But I'm told it fits me, because porcupines have those spikes on their back. They're like needles. And I'm known for being able to find a needle in a haystack. I guess that's why so many people come to me to locate others. Anyway, I took the job to try and locate Karen's sister. At first, I had nothing to go by. But I did come across a clue a little while later. Apparently the sister, whose name is Kendra, started a new job recently in a little town in the middle of Whoop Whoop somewhere. There's some small town known as Birdsville. Birdsville is a small town in the Shire of Diamantina, Queensland, Australia. Birdsville is located on land traditionally owned by the Wonkanguru people in the Channel Country of central West Queensland. I made my way down to Birdsville and found it to be interesting. It's said when you go to Birdsville, you can experience the wilderness of Queensland firsthand, for it's near Diamantina River and the Simpson Desert, all in one area. But the most interesting part to me was the amount of missing person cases all coming from this one town. I started to investigate to see if there were any links between the missing people from this town and my missing person case, Karen's sister Kendra. I think I'm getting close. I have discovered that there is indeed a common link between all the cases and my own. All the people who have gone missing have disappeared after starting work in a little corner store known in this town. I went to this store to ask around, and I found a young woman behind the counter. I walked up to her and I said, "Hello, miss. The name's Detective Porcupine." She laughed at me. I continued, "I'm here in regards to a missing persons case. Can you please let me speak to your boss?" And that's when the woman's laugh suddenly stopped, and her facial expression changed. "I'm sorry, sir, but the man who's in charge here is no longer with us. He went missing about 6 months ago. I'm the only person here who's been around since the boss went missing. Everyone who came before me also went missing, but suddenly stopped after I started working here. I take my orders from the higher-ups who don't live in this town, so I guess technically that means I'm currently in charge." Oh, that was unexpected. I knew a lot of people went missing from here, but I didn't know it was so many. "Do you know about the last known whereabouts of your boss before he went missing?" I asked her. "The last thing I heard, he was getting a key from a man named Willie to close up this shop. Both the boss and Willie have been missing since," she said. "Well, thank you for your time," I replied. "I guess my next lead is this Willie guy." I had a look in the yellow pages to see where he lived and went there the very next day. The house was just on the outskirts of the Simpson Desert. If you were to walk out of the house and keep moving forward, you'd get lost out there. The house was an old run-down place, cobwebs and rotting wood. I walked up to the door and rang the bell. Ding dong. A man opened the door. He had a big white beard and a singlet on. Excuse me, sir. I'm Detective Porcupine, and I'm looking for a man named Willie. I am Willie, he said back to me. Oh, I was under the impression that you were missing. I was told that the boss of the corner store and yourself went missing about 6 months ago. He smiled at me. Oh no, I never went missing. Only my friend Abraham did. He was always the one to give me my job of the day, and with him no longer around, I have no reason to be around as well. I've been here in my house. Would you like to come in, Mr. Porcupine? I entered the man's house and spoke to him about the missing people for a while. It started to get dark and I thought, it's probably time to go. Thank you for your time, sir, but I must be going, I said to him. No, you can't leave, he replied back to me. Excuse me? I haven't had any work in quite some time, and it hasn't been able to feed. If you leave, it'll continue to go hungry. The smile on the man's face grew as he grabbed an axe next to his fireplace and took a swing at me. I managed to dodge it and ran to the door. I quickly opened it and ran right into the desert. Why? Why did I go into the desert? That's exactly where he wanted me to run. Oh, fuck! Oh, my leg! What the fuck? It's caught in a bear trap. Who the fuck has a bear trap in the middle of the Australian Simpson Desert? My vision is dimming. Somebody help. I awaken to find myself in a room that looks like a basement. What the hell is this place? What? So many keys in the corner of the room. And a table that looks like it's covered in dried up blood. And a barrel with some kind of silver liquid inside it. Where am I? Oh, my leg. My leg is missing. Where's my leg? I see a door. I managed to drag myself to it, but fuck, it's locked. What the hell do I do? Even if a key is in that pile, even if one was to fit the door, it would take too long to find which one fits. There seems to be a trap door to my left, with a key sitting in the keyhole. Yes, I think to myself, even if it leads nowhere, at least I can hide in there and make Willie think I'm not here anymore. I drag myself over to the trap door and turn the key, unlocking the trap door. But that's when I hear it. Jingle, jingle, jingle. Coming from the door behind me. It opens up and I hear the words screamed at me. Get away from there! Willie runs at me with his axe, but I roll and dodge the attack. The axe is caught in the ground. This is my chance. I get up on my knees and I punch Willie in the willy. He falls to the ground in pain. I put myself up, one leg bent, as the other, a stump, holding myself up. I pull the axe out of the wooden floor, push myself up with my one leg, and let the momentum push myself down as I hack into the neck of Willie. I continue to hack and hack and hack and hack. until Willie is completely decapitated and his head rolls away. I fall to my knees, breathing heavily. Finally, it's over. I can surely say I know what happened to Kendra now. Oh, this piece of shit killed her, that's for sure. Suddenly, I hear a creak. What was that? I look behind me. The trap door is opened. What? How is the door opened? And what is that? Breathing on my neck. Some people ask me why I lost interest in Pokemon, but I never tell them the real reason. I give them the usual, I grew up answer, but that's not true at all. I feel like the best way to accept what I saw that day is to tell somebody about it. So that's exactly what I'm doing. This is the story of the cartridge that destroyed my devoted adoration for Pokemon. This is the story of Pokemon Rotted Yellow. I was working at one of the video game stores in town for about a year and a half without any sort of incident. The worst thing that would happen was that someone would try and trade in a scratched game. One day, I'd been working alone at the store when a young boy, maybe 10 at most, came in. I noticed that he was holding a cartridge for the Game Boy Color. I was immediately surprised, as not many kids that age even know what a Game Boy Color is, much less own one. I asked him if he needed any help, and he told me that he needed someone to fix his game for him because it was broken. I asked him if he had bought the game from our location, and he said he didn't know, that his father had gotten it for him. Normally I would have said no, but then I noticed that the cartridge was a Pokemon Yellow game, and it just didn't feel right to deprive a kid of a Pokemon adventure. I asked him what was wrong with the game, and he told me that it kept freezing in the same spot every time he tried to play, and that his Pokemon kept dying. I thought that the boy just maybe had a weak team, but I went along with it and told him that I would do my best to try and fix it, though I couldn't promise anything. The boy gave me his name and phone number and went on his way. Not thinking too much of it, I put the game in the top drawer beneath the cash register. As I was closing the shop that night, I threw the game into my bag and headed home, finding myself eager to play the game after all these years. Hopefully, it was what I thought and he just had a weak team. I could fix that pretty quickly, and I'd probably be the kid's hero. I got home and found my old Game Boy from when I was a kid, grabbed some new batteries and clicked them into the back of the console, and then dug through my bag to find the game. I was about to put the game in when something caught my eye. Instead of the normal-looking Pikachu that was supposed to be on the sticker, this one had its eyes scratched off entirely. Probably just a coincidence, I thought to myself. But the sight of it still made me feel a bit uneasy. I turned the game on. The game started off as normal. The Game Freak symbol was shown. The opening sequence played as normal. But once the title card appeared, there was only silence, though I didn't think much of it at the time. I selected the saved game file, but the file didn't open. Instead, a message popped up saying that the save was corrupt. That was strange because the boy told me that his file was okay. It was just frozen at one part of the game. I tried a few more times, but to no avail. I was getting frustrated, so I decided to start a new file. The new file worked, and the game played out like it was supposed to, without any glitches. I was in Cerulean City when I was suddenly teleported to Lavender Town out of nowhere. The action reminded me of the infamous Mew glitch, and then I thought that maybe the kid had tried to glitch and messed up, causing the game to freeze. I walked to the outskirts of Lavender Town, and to my surprise, the glitch was active, and a wild Mew appeared. Instead of the regular battle theme, however, the Lavender Town music just continued to play. Maybe there was something wrong with the cartridge after all. I also noticed that none of my battle options worked. The only choice I had was to run. This pissed me off, because who doesn't want a Mew? But because it was the only option, and I didn't want to start over at the last save, I was forced to do it. After that, the game continued normally. I went to Celadon City and obtained the Sylph Scope. When it came time to do the cemetery mission, the game went haywire again. Instead of having to travel through each individual floor, I was teleported to the final floor, where I assumed I was still supposed to calm the soul of Marowak. The wild Marowak appeared, but there was no music. After I sent out my Pokemon, Pikachu, the Marowak transformed into Mew. I battled it and tried to get its HP down. But even though my Pikachu was at a much higher level than Mew, it barely did any damage. Somehow, Mew never actually attacked. I eventually managed to get its HP low enough, and I tried throwing a Pokeball at it. Maybe if I caught it, the game would go back to normal. When I threw the ball, Mew turned into one of the unidentifiable ghosts, the ones that you saw without the Sylph Scope. Out of nowhere, the text read, "Ash whited out." This really confused me. My Pikachu was nowhere close to fainting, and I still had all my other Pokemon. Instead of restarting at the Pokemon Center, I was sent back to the final floor of the cemetery. I noticed that Pikachu wasn't following behind me. I walked over to where the battle would surely begin again, when I was suddenly led to a tombstone near where the battle had taken place. I hit the A button to see if there was any text on it, and the sound of Pikachu's fainting cry played. My Pikachu had died. Right after the cry had played, the Marowak appeared again. I sent out my Pidgeot, and Marowak once again transformed into Mew. This time, Pidgeot attacked on its own, without my command. Mew was left with 1 HP, Mew used Destiny Bond, and when my Pidgeot attacked without my command again, Mew evaded the attack. Mew had used Curse, leaving it with 0 HP, and Destiny Bond had taken down Pidgeot along with Mew. I still should have won, because I had 4 more Pokemon in my party. Instead, I whited out again. I wanted to stop, but I knew that I couldn't. It was a sick joke that I desperately needed to know the ending of. Once again, I restarted at the final floor of the cemetery, where I was led to a new tombstone, where of course, my Pidgeot was. The fight started again, and sure enough, the same thing happened to every member of my party, until I was left with no more Pokemon. I expected to white out after my last Pokemon had fainted, or in this case, died. But then, my character was forced into battle to fight Mew himself. This was getting ridiculous. But then again, something was stopping me from turning off the game. Of course, there was no way for me to attack Mew, and I didn't think that Mew would have any powers over me. However, Mew was somehow able to use Curse and Destiny Bond on me. How was a Pokemon able to use that power on a person? I whited out immediately. When I reappeared, I wasn't at the cemetery. I was in my bedroom, in Pallet Town. I immediately noticed that my character didn't look normal either. I was transparent. No music was playing. I walked a few steps when my menu screen popped up. My trainer card appeared. I had no badges, no money, and no Pokemon in my Pokedex. I closed it, and the menu popped up again, showing me that I had 1 Pokemon in my party. However, there was no sprite design or name next to the HP bar. I checked the mystery Pokemon's moveset and noticed that it had only 1 move: Teleport. I tried leaving my room, but I wasn't able to. I tried to interact with the map, as well as my computer, but none of those worked either. Not sure what else to do, I used my Pokemon's teleport move, unsure of where it would take me. I appeared at the cemetery, and I was led to a 7th tombstone. This one showing my character's name on it. I wanted to be sick. Whoever gave this cartridge to that boy was a twisted person. I couldn't imagine a young kid playing this game. I didn't know where to go or what to do. So I walked over to where the fight with Mew normally would have happened. A battle sequence started. But it wasn't with Mew. It was with a trainer. My side of the battle screen showed the sprite of a Marowak. I froze, realizing what was going to happen. As the trainer sent out his Pokemon, Marowak transformed into Mew. I looked at my moves list, expecting only Teleport to be there. Instead, I had two moves: Curse and Destiny Bond. I turned off the console. I didn't know what else to do. I convinced myself to turn it back on a few hours later to see if my save file was still there. But it was corrupt. The boy never came back for his game. I think he just wanted to get rid of it. I can't say I blame him.
I was always told not to look out a window at night, because you might not like what's looking back at you. They call this an old wives' tale, or something like that. But for me, it was just a bunch of silly crap. So, I made a point to do the exact opposite. Like most people my age, I guess I felt like I was spitting in the face of some outdated half-assed logic that some old person had come up with. I mean, who the hell goes around looking into people's windows? Am I right? And since I didn't believe in ghosts, monsters, demons or whatever, I didn't give that notion a thought either. I know, some of you will say that there are creepy people that have been known to do this, but I've always lived in a very nice neighbourhood, so the likelihood of this happening was, well, pretty slim. Or so I thought. One night, I got out of bed to make a late night deposit in the porcelain bank. I finished my business and washed up, and decided I was kind of parched, so I went to the kitchen for a drink. I grabbed a glass, opened the fridge, and filled it with tasty cucumber lime water I keep in there. Because, you know, who wants to drink boring tap water? I finished drinking, and as I was about to leave the kitchen, I glanced at the window. I might as well take a peek, I said to myself as I walked over to it. I looked out, and as usual, nothing there. I turned to walk back to my bedroom when I decided to take one more look. The most horrible face I'd ever seen stared back at me. The face, which was pale white, smiled at me, but not with a regular smile. Its smile was inhumanly wide and filled with sharp teeth. I screamed, ran back to my room, jumped in bed, and covered my head with the blankets. What the hell was that? I whispered to myself. I tried to put it out of my mind and go back to sleep, but it took a while. The next morning, my parents asked me why I'd screamed the previous night. I gave them a lame excuse about seeing my reflection in the window, and it had scared me. They seemed content with my explanation, so there was no further discussion. Besides, I was convinced that I'd imagined the whole thing in the first place. It had been the middle of the night. I was extremely tired and my eyes were probably playing tricks on me. That night, I found myself up late, working on coursework for one of my college classes. It had been hours since dinner, and I was starting to feel a little bit hungry. I knew there was a container of hummus and some artisan crackers with my name on them in the kitchen, so off I went. With my snack in hand, I started back to my room,
As I passed the window, I stopped and glanced at it. I didn't really want to look out of it, but I refused to bow to superstition. It was 2020, and I was a college student, for crying out loud. My brain just wasn't built like that. I walked over to the window and looked out. Nothing. See? There, I told myself smugly. Superstition is wrong again. I walked a few steps down the hall, then turned around and went back to the window and looked back out it. The face was there, smiling its evil smile. I dropped the hummus and crackers as I backed away from the window. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. The thing on the other side of the window raised a pale hand and wagged a long finger at me, like a mother chastising her child. I fled to my room, and as I entered, I saw the blinds on my 2 windows were open. The thing's face stared at me from both of them, and I ran back into the hall. I went into the bathroom and slammed the door behind me. I slumped down on the toilet with my head in my hands and begged for the thing to please go away. I heard a tap above me, and when I looked up at the small bathroom window, the face was there too. It still smiled while it shook its head. It wasn't going to stop, apparently. Hopelessly, I stood up, stepped into the shower, and pulled the curtain closed. I stayed there for the remainder of the night, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, my parents found me in the bathroom. I tried hysterically to tell them what had happened, but they only looked at me like I was crazy. And after I tried to cover all of the windows in the house, they brought me to this hospital. I've been here for a month now, and it's really not that bad. The doctors made sure I got a room without any windows, which has really helped my mental state. And things have been going so well that a few days ago, I got my cell phone back. With all this time on my hands, I've been thinking about the circumstances that led me to this point, and I've decided that maybe I was wrong about old wives' tales and superstitions. In fact, I urge anyone reading this not to blow off the old ways. They exist for a reason. That being said, there's another saying I've heard that I can't help but be concerned about, especially considering I have a mirror in my room. It's the one about the eyes being the windows to the soul. Does your door have a peephole? When you finish reading this, go to your door and look through it. Tell me what you see. My wife and I are in a tough place. See, she's lost her job at the start of the lockdown, and that's left us on a limited income. Our lease was up at the end of August, so we started looking for a new place to move into on September 1st. When we started looking, we were concerned. Los Angeles is an expensive city, and a single income is a tough thing to navigate for any young couple. But considering unemployment is as high as it is, some places have been running deals. My wife and I found a great one on Craigslist. And best of all, the first month was free. So we went to check it out. It was a big, old, quirky apartment in the Hollywood Hills. Kind of ornate. Thick front door, great bathroom with funky tiles, natural light in the dining area that we'd have to buy big curtains to block out, an on-site laundry. Parking was a bit of a nightmare. If you're not familiar with LA, the hills are no joke. But the price was right, and we only shared one wall. Plus, the first month was free. We were smart. This wasn't our first apartment. We tried everything, every switch, opened every cabinet and window, took pictures of every drop of paint on the ground, tried all the locks, you name it. We were thorough, and the landlord assured us over the phone that it was a quiet building with quiet neighbours, thick wood floors, and a manager that lived off-site. We never met anyone in person, but the place was very clean, and we were told that they were looking for a new tenant as soon as possible. The last people had moved out unexpectedly. We didn't hear that last part. We just heard that the first month was free. So we applied and got it. They took us with my terrible credit and the single income between us. In 2014, I had to fight two bearded weirdos, who turned out to be half a punk band from Austin, for the last apartment application at a place at Atwater Village, so honestly, the biggest red flag was how easy it was. But my wife insisted that this was all good. It was a chance for her to reevaluate her career, an excuse to downsize. The move was going to be a great opportunity, and she'd make my favourite dinner the first night. September 1st came and the move went smoothly. A couple of friends drove over to help us move, but we wore our masks the whole time. Moving couches upstairs is no fun no matter what's on your face, but I didn't mind. I was just grateful for the help. My wife made good on her promise too. And so, that first night, I really thought that she was right, that it was all good. And the next morning, I found our front door unlocked and open. I chalked it up to a mistake I'd made, that my wife had made. We laughed it off. Can't let that happen again. Clearly, we were tired from the move. We'd order in that night, so we spent the day unpacking. I can work from home, so I did a little heavy lifting, but mostly my wife did it all. She's got better taste than I do when it comes to those things, and she'd let me pick dinner that night. Our favourite Italian place on Hillhurst just closed, so we tried a new spot. We splurged a little to celebrate our new move. And why not? The place we picked had bottles of wine on sale. Postmates gave us an hour, so we fooled around until the driver arrived. I missed the text from the app and the call from the driver, so we were a little startled when we heard a knock at the door. I pulled on some pants and ran out of my bedroom to the front hall, stopping to look out the peephole. And I nearly screamed. Within 2 inches between my side of the door and the outside, someone had inserted a number of very tiny miniatures, viewable only because of the fisheye lens. When I put my eye up to the hole, I could see the delivery driver, mask on, but clearly annoyed at how long I was taking. And, in literally minute detail, Me and my wife asleep in our bed, with a black, vaguely human figure standing at the foot. I threw the door open. I don't know what I must have looked like. The driver stammered out something about having my food, dropped it, and ran down the stairs. I ignored him and immediately went to examine the other side of the peephole. I looked from the outside in, trying to prove that I wasn't crazy. But I couldn't see anything. The illusion only worked in one direction. I took the food inside and brought my wife to the door. She was wrapped in a long bathrobe and a little annoyed to be out of bed. She couldn't understand what had me so worked up until I showed her. We called the landlord immediately, and then the police. It was a blur filing the report. My pasta was cold by the time I got to it. We were both jumpy. But it was also late. We were going to have to go to bed, and neither one of us wanted to. We decided to sleep in shifts. At least that was the plan. My wife thinks she fell asleep around 3 a.m, and we both slept through the night. When we got out of bed in the morning, we found the door open again. I looked out the peephole and the miniatures had been removed. I noticed that some of the paint had been chipped away from the outside. None of our phone pictures turned out, and therefore we have no proof. But there's something wrong with this building and this whole situation. There are these things in the ceilings of every room, like speakers in a Macy's. We still haven't met any of our neighbours. I walked around the building and knocked on doors, but no one answered. Were they scared to look outside? We contacted the landlord about changing the locks, but we haven't gotten a reply. We feel like we've been abandoned. The first free month is almost up. We've spent each night since the 3rd, sleeping in shifts and watching the door. My wife said she thought she saw the doorknob turn on the 12th, but she couldn't be sure. I just bought a doorbell camera, and it'll be here by the end of the week. But we both fell asleep together by accident last night. And when we woke up, our front door was open and the miniatures were back. We're in bed, and so is the black figure. Its bright white eyes are open and crying. Do we run? Where can we go?